Cancel culture has become a buzz phrase in our world. And what does it mean? It means that if someone, usually someone famous, does or says something inappropriate, that person should be canceled. And by canceled, we mean removed from whatever job or status they may have. While cancel culture seems relatively new, people have been canceling other people since, well, forever. We may not call it canceling, but the outcome is the same. Someone did something wrong to us. That person, they gotta go. Maybe one of your friends talked about you behind your back. Maybe you got unfairly passed over for a promotion at work. Maybe a coworker stabbed you in the back for that promotion. Maybe your spouse said some hurtful things to you. Maybe your kid said some hurtful things to you. No matter the situation, when we're hurt, when something happens to us that we consider unfair, our perspective tends to be this: someone is in the wrong, and that someone is not us. We've all been there. Maybe you're there today. Internally, our reactions to hurt can be all over the place. We get frustrated, we get angry, we get bitter, we get a little judgy. And on the outside, we can react by shutting down, not communicating, being dismissive, being a little judgy. But no matter how we react, the truth is the same. Because of the unfairness or the hurt, we believe that our relationship with that person is broken, damaged, and not right in some way. Everything we do is in reaction to that reality. In a lot of ways, our reaction feels justified because we feel like they were wrong to do what they did, and we are right to be as upset as we are. It only makes sense, right? I mean, clearly we're mad because they did something wrong. If everybody could just get on board with this reality, we'd be making progress. And if someone doesn't take full responsibility for their behavior, we often decide to cut that person off in some way. Maybe it's overt and we just stop talking to them. Or maybe it's subtle and we put up walls. But this stance leaves us with a question. Where do we go from here? If they were wrong and we were right, does that mean we're justified in how we treat them, no matter how bad that might be? Does that mean we're off the hook and won't be held responsible for how we handle our relationship with them? Does their behavior justify our behavior in return? Because let's be honest, not being mad or not being frustrated or not creating distance almost seems like you're saying what they did was okay, right? If we give them a pass on their behavior, we're practically validating that behavior. And the last thing you want to do is send a message that you're okay with how you were treated, or that the person can keep mistreating you because it wasn't a big deal. In situations like this, the idea of forgiveness seems weak, irresponsible, and yes, completely unfair. Someone hurt us, and someone needs to pay. So what do we do when canceling someone seems like the right and fair thing to do? To examine this question today, we're going to look at letters written by the Apostle Paul to some early followers of Jesus. The first passage we're going to read is from Romans. But first, let's set the scene for this letter. When this letter was written, Rome was the epicenter of the largest empire. And at that time, Rome wasn't a friendly place if you were a Christian. Many Roman values ran counter to the teachings of Jesus. Christianity had just begun and was quickly spreading throughout the known world. Because of this growth, the Roman government considered Christianity a threat to their power and culture, which made the new Christians prominent outsiders in society. And more than that, Rome was infamous for violently suppressing perceived threats. Jesus himself suffered the cruelest of Roman punishment, crucifixion. So if you're part of a targeted minority living under a violent regime, it would be fair to say things aren't fair, right? It would be okay to be angry and bitter with your circumstances. As it turns out, Paul wrote, no. A large portion of the book of Romans in the Bible provides a master class in what it means to receive and give grace. Paul queued up this idea with this big statement. God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Paul essentially flipped the script on how we see fair and unfair. Because the truth is, at some point, we have all gotten it wrong. We all have done something to deserve punishment. Yet even when we didn't deserve it, God extended love. He didn't hold back. He saw you and me at our very worst, and instead of judgment, he moved toward us by sending Jesus. He offered unconditional grace, even though we were undeserving of that grace. People haven't changed since this letter was written. We still have the same impulses. When we're wronged, our first response is to get caught up in what was done to us, to think of what the other person deserves in return. Yet we tend to have a one-sided view of justice. We tend to forget how often we get things wrong ourselves. As Paul wrote, God looked at what we did and he didn't dismiss us. God loved us and then he dismissed our sin. God canceled our wrongs. He didn't cancel us. He doesn't give up on us. So when we start to realize how God forgives our wrongs and chooses to love us no matter what, it can help us consider this question: what does that grace mean for how we treat others who have hurt us? Paul answered this question for us in another letter to the church of Colossae. He wrote this: "Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you." Paul provided an interesting visual for how we can handle the wrongs done to us. He shared the image of carrying the weight of each other's imperfections together. It's this picture of patient commitment to seeing each other as humans instead of villains, even when it's challenging to do, especially when it's challenging to do. Because of what God has done for us, we're called to do the same for others, to forgive as we were forgiven, with no strings attached, with no conditions, with nothing held back. Let's be real. It's difficult to embrace the concept of grace when it comes to how we see and treat others. But it can be just as difficult when it comes to how we see and treat ourselves. Some of us are much harder on ourselves than we are on others. Yet Paul provided us the same solution to bitterness with ourselves. Because God has forgiven us, because God has made us right and sees us through a lens of grace, then we should see ourselves the exact same way. But here's what all of this doesn't mean. It doesn't mean we treat what was done to us or what we did as no big deal. Paul wasn't downplaying bad behavior. Harmful words or actions can have consequences beyond how we feel. But just as God looks at us and the mistakes we've made and sees us as more than what we've done wrong, we need to see the people who have treated us unfairly as more than the thing they did wrong too. And God's forgiveness tells us exactly how we should see ourselves and see others. When it comes to how we respond to the hurts in life, God set the standard. He showed us grace, even though we didn't deserve grace, and he calls us to do the same. He wants us to cancel the debt, not the person. And listen, we can address a wrong. We need to speak up when we've been hurt. Grace isn't a blank check to be treated poorly. But what we're talking about today is in the 99% category. Those things where people hurt us accidentally or hurt us in a moment or say careless words. These are things we all do. So even when someone does something wrong to us, we can refuse to define a person by that wrong thing. We can see them as an imperfect human and decide to see them as God sees them, as people worthy of love and not just the sum of their wrongdoings. We do this because even though the offense was real, it doesn't tell the whole story about the person who wronged us. Just like the things we have done wrong don't tell the whole story about who we are. God has always looked at us and seen us as more than what we've done wrong and more than the sin we've committed. God looks at us and sees us as someone to love. So God forgives, and in response, we're called to do the same thing for others. So how do we cancel the debt and not the person? How do we stop being hard on others when they get it wrong? How do we bear with each other, like Paul wrote about? How do we stay focused on God's unfailing love? Here are 3 ways we can start. Identify where you need more compassion in your life. Maybe you need more compassion for others. Or maybe you're way harder on yourself than others, and you struggle to allow yourself to experience grace. Determine the way you tend to lean and pay attention to that. Figure out the areas where you might need to show more compassion and then work on practicing it. Identify who you are beating up. Get specific. Is it you? Is it a friend? A family member? Is it your boss? Who are you mentally rejecting or only seeing as the wrong they did? What do you need to do to start seeing them or seeing yourself as God does, as someone worthy of all love and forgiveness? Remember, no one is perfect. Whether you're holding yourself or someone else to that standard, it's impossible to meet and will only lead to disappointment and frustration. People will let you down. We can't control other people's behavior. What we can control is how we handle ourselves when we're let down or hurt and disappointed. Can we forgive others? Can we respond with grace? We can cancel the debt and not the person. We do this when we remember people are more than their mistakes and that there is more to the story than just their wrongdoings. We do that when we remember God hasn't held our wrongs against us, which compels us to be gracious to others. Forgiveness is a challenge. It doesn't come naturally. It will never be easy. It will always be easier to cancel a person than it is to cancel their wrong. But we can forgive because of what God has done for us. As unnatural and difficult as it might feel, we don't give up on it because it was modeled first for us by God. So this week, consider some relationships in your life that could use some grace. Who can you reach out to? Who could use a little grace? Think about God's amazing grace, a grace that's available to all of us, no matter what we've done. By definition, grace is undeserved, which means we can extend grace to anyone. So think of that person, that relationship that could use some grace, and then consider where you could cancel the debt, not the person.